I've taken over 20 auditions for full-time orchestra jobs, and I want to share with you what finally worked for me and how I finally got my first full-time orchestra job. This video is part 2 in a multi-part series, so if you haven't seen part 1 yet, you can either click here or follow the link in the video description. Part 1 is all about getting organized, so I definitely recommend watching that before watching this video, since I'll be referring back to things I talked about there in this video. Okay, so by this point, I've got my research document done, my playlist is set up, my practice binder is fully organized, and my practice schedule is set. So now it's finally time to get the instrument out and practice. My personal preference is to start at the very top of the list and just work my way down. It helps me to clearly visualize my progress, and it makes it more likely that I won't leave 1 or 2 excerpts underprepared. So let's start on our first excerpt. As an example, let's say we're starting with the Bedinnery from Bach's Second Orchestral Suite. Somewhere on the excerpt, write down your target tempo that you have in your research document. Then, on your first sticky note that you applied during organization, write down whatever half the target number is, along with today's date. Since my target for this excerpt is generally around 120, I'll start this at 60. Then, each day that I practice the excerpt, I'll increase the tempo by 1 click on a standard metronome. So, for example, day 1 is going to be 60, day 2 is 66, day 3 is 69, etc. This might seem unnecessarily cruel, but practicing at every tempo does wonders for fast technical excerpts and also improves the tone of the slow and lyric ones. Keep in mind that while it's tempting to sort of speed run your way through this phase of preparation, this is what's going to set the foundation for all of the work that you do later. Think of it like this. Every time you feed your hands the correct information at a slower tempo, the more likely they are to remember it correctly. It's okay to spot check some of this stuff closer to tempo as needed, but don't skip out on really dedicating the time to slow and careful practice. This early note learning phase is also an excellent time to focus on your intonation. I often alternate between metronome work on one day and intonation work on the next day, or if I've got the time, I'll do both on the same day. When I do intonation work, practicing with a reference drone pitch is one of the best ways to approach it. Taking the time to dial in every interval, every shift, every double stop, exactly in tune. It's like my youth orchestra director always said, there's no such thing as a little bit out of tune. You're either in or you're out. Once your excerpts start to feel consistent and you're starting to approach your target tempo, it's time to move on to the self-recording phase. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this phase, self-recording, is quite possibly tied for the most impactful part of the preparation process along with mock auditions. Too often when I was preparing for auditions, I would wait way too long to record myself because I guess I wanted it to be perfect before I even recorded it because I was afraid to make a mistake or something. But why was I afraid to make a mistake if I was going to be the only one listening to it? In hindsight, it makes almost zero sense. So start recording yourself as soon as you feel like you have the notes learned. It's so true what they say, the microphone doesn't lie. Listening back with a critical ear will tell you so much information, not only about what's going well, but it'll also instantly tell you what needs to be worked on further. I can't stress the importance of this phase enough. Some of you might be wondering at this point, well, Bobby, I don't have any sort of studio to record in. I don't have any microphones, so how am I supposed to do this? The good news is that getting effective recordings at home has never been easier. There's cheap plug-and-play USB mics for your computer, reasonably priced handheld recorders, and even attachments that you can buy to get high-quality recordings from your phone or your tablet. My best advice would be choose the best solution that you can reasonably afford, but also know that even just recording yourself on a phone tells you more information than not recording at all. I'll plan to link a few options down in the description of this video. So let's talk about how the self-recording phase should go. I tend to divide self-recording into 2 different segments that I call in-depth self-recording and round-style self-recording. For the in-depth recording, I'm going to focus on one excerpt at a time. I'll hit record, play the excerpt, stop the recording, and immediately listen back. I'll take notes on what worked and what didn't, practice those things as needed, and then record the excerpt again. Do this as many times as you need to feel confident you've arrived at something that works, and then move on to the next excerpt. For the round style self-recording, this is where you're going to be essentially simulating playing a set of excerpts in a row like you would in a round for an audition. Since you have no idea what's going to be asked on what round or in what order, I like to just randomize them. There's a super handy random list generator at random.org that I make liberal use of when I'm recording audition lists. What I do is plug all of my excerpts into the generator, hit go, then divide the result in thirds. Then I'll record a third of the list, listen back to that, practice the stuff as needed, and then record the next third of the list. As you go through the self-recording process, you're likely to make certain discoveries that made an impact on your presentation. As you make these discoveries about each excerpt, write them down on the second sticky note that you applied during the organization. As an example, I've historically struggled with the fourth movement of Mozart 39. I would always get tripped up somewhere in the 16th notes, but for me, simply writing down light left hand and stable right hand on the second sticky note dramatically improved the reliability of my performance. Seriously, don't underestimate writing the discoveries down so you don't forget them later. What you're likely to notice through the self-recording process, especially if you haven't recorded yourself much before, is that you're likely to make a lot more mistakes at the beginning that you don't usually make when you just play as normal.
I've made a huge mistake.
I made a huge mistake.
I've made a huge mistake. I've made a huge mistake.
Pressing the record button sort of raises the stakes of the performance, since obviously we want to make it sound good, and that makes it a little nerve-inducing sometimes. But that also makes it really, really good for practice, not only for the preparation process, but also for solidifying the final product. It's like I always say, how do you get better at something? You practice it. How do you get better at recording? By practicing recording. Remember like 2 seconds ago when I posed the question, how do you get better at recording? The same thing applies here. How do you get better at playing for other people? By practicing playing for other people. So also, how do you get better at auditioning? By practicing auditioning. If you're unfamiliar, a mock audition is exactly what it sounds like. It's a simulation of what's likely going to happen on the day of the audition. How close to the actual experience of taking the audition it is really depends on circumstance, but what this amounts to is just getting out and playing in front of friends, colleagues, teachers, etc. I like to find not only people that play my instrument, but ideally people who play a completely unrelated instrument. For example, I've received some of the best feedback I've ever had from timpanists, horn players, clarinetists, bassoonists, violinists. I mean, as a bassist, I can certainly expect the principals of the string sections are going to be on the audition committee, but the rest could be made up of just about anybody, so diversifying the type of musician you play for is incredibly helpful. Typically, what I like to do in the early stages of mock auditions is I'll just get a couple of friends together, I'll play one excerpt at a time, and then get feedback on that excerpt immediately. Maybe even take the time to workshop it before I move on to the next excerpt. When I'm later in the mock audition phase, I start wanting to simulate the audition experience as closely as possible. As an example, one of my friends even rigged up his living room with a screen, a proctor, a warm-up room, and all of these things definitely helped to contribute to the realism. I would even have the people listening to me speak to me as though it was a blind audition behind a screen, saying things like, "Could the candidate please play that excerpt again," focusing more on dynamics and phrasing. Also, make sure that you record every mock audition. Just like the early phases of self-recording, the early phases of mock auditions might be full of nerve-induced mistakes and shakiness that you might not pick up on while you're playing. Listen back to your recordings afterwards, take some notes, make some adjustments, and the more you do this, the process will continue to get easier. Anyway, so that's going to do it for part 2 of this video. Now, did I miss anything that you found helpful in your audition preparation? Let me know down in the comments. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, consider leaving a like and getting subscribed to the channel. Subscribing is completely free, and you're always free to change your mind later. And with that, I hope you're having a fantastic day today, and I do look forward to seeing you in the next video. See ya.